a prison in the small German town of Hamelin on the River Weser. Early May 1947. The building holds men and women convicted by British military courts. And on this morning, the executions are scheduled at half-hour intervals, one at a time, with a British hangman flown in for the task, and a female prison official required to be present. 3 of the condemned came from the same place. A concentration camp built for women, 90 kilometers north of Berlin. The 3rd woman brought from her cell that morning was 38 years old. Before the war, she had been a trained nurse. Her name was Greta Bösel. That contrast is the reason her case is still studied. She was not a commandant. She held no SS rank, and she spent roughly 8 months at Ravensbrück, a fraction of the time served by many of the people tried alongside her. So how does a woman with a nursing certificate end up condemned by a British court for taking part in choosing which prisoners would live and which would be sent away to die? She was born Greta Müller on May 9, 1908, in Elberfeld, a textile and chemical town in the industrial Rhineland that is now part of Wuppertal. She trained and worked as a nurse. She married. Beyond that, the documentary record is thin, and that thinness is itself historically important. Researchers who work on the women employed in the camp system have noted repeatedly that personnel files, biographies, and interrogation records for female staff are far patchier than those for male SS officers. We know a great deal about what Bösel did in one camp during one winter, and comparatively little about the 36 years that came before it. What we do know is the system she entered. Ravensbrück was more than a camp. It was the training ground for female overseers, or Aufseherinnen, across the entire camp network. Roughly 30,000 women passed through that training. Legally, they were not members of the SS. They were called civilian employees attached to it in the category the Germans called SS Gefolge. Some volunteered, drawn by wages better than factory work. Others, especially as Germany's labor shortage deepened in 1944, were directed into the job through labor offices. Bösel arrived in August 1944. Her post was in the camp's labor allocation office, with the title Arbeitseinsatzführerin, work deployment leader. On paper, it was administrative. Camp map. By then, Ravensbrück was enormous and collapsing under its own weight. Opened in 1939 near Fürstenberg, it eventually registered around 120,000 women and children, 20,000 men, and 200 teenage girls, drawn from more than 30 nations. Prisoners sewed uniforms, braided mats, and built electrical components in workshops erected by Siemens and Halski. More than 40 satellite camps drew on its labor supply. In the autumn of 1944, the SS put up a tent to hold the overflow, and in that same period, the camp's purpose shifted. In early 1945, the SS installed a provisional gas chamber in a hut beside the crematorium. Between late January and April 1945, according to the Ravensbrück Memorial, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 people were murdered there. The nearby Uckermark site, once a camp for adolescent girls, was repurposed to hold women classified as sick, elderly, or no longer productive. Here is why the labor office matters. In a camp where survival depended on being classified as fit for work, the office that measured fitness sat at the entrance to the killing process. So what exactly did Bösel do there? According to the trial record, prosecutors alleged that she took part in the selections carried out at Ravensbrück in November 1944, the sorting of prisoners for transfer to Uckermark or for the gas chamber. Survivor testimony and the statements of her fellow defendants formed the core of the case. Historians who have worked through the files note that Bösel gave inconsistent accounts of her own role, at times minimizing it. A remark widely attributed to her, that prisoners who could not work should be left to rot, appears in accounts of the case, but it is reported secondhand rather than established as a verified quotation, and I won't present it as her exact words. What the court did establish was participation. It convicted her of ill treatment, of murder, and of taking part in the selections. By spring 1945, the structure that had employed her was disintegrating. The Red Army was closing on Mecklenburg. Several thousand prisoners were handed over to Swedish and Danish Red Cross officials. Then, Commandant Fritz Suren ordered the camp emptied, and more than 20,000 prisoners were forced to march northwest in columns. On April 30th, 1945, Soviet troops entered Ravensbrück and found around 2,000 people too sick to walk. Bösel was not among the staff who stayed. She left the camp with her husband. She did not get far. She was arrested by British forces and held in the British occupation zone, where military courts were already assembling cases against camp personnel. The first Hamburg-Ravensbrück trial opened on December 5, 1946, at the Curio House in the Rotherbaum district, and ran until February 3, 1947. 16 defendants stood in the dock: a deputy camp leader, a Gestapo inspector, camp doctors, overseers, and 3 former prisoners who had held privileged positions. The charge, under British military jurisdiction, was committing a war crime, and that framing carried a significant limitation. The court's authority extended to crimes against nationals of Allied countries. German victims, and the German girls held at Uckermark, largely fell outside its reach. The evidence was testimonial. Survivors from France, Poland, Austria, the Netherlands, and elsewhere describing what they had seen, set against the defendant's own interrogation statements. Bösel's defense stressed that she had been sent to Ravensbrück late in the war under wartime labor obligation, and that her work was clerical. The court was unpersuaded. All 15 surviving defendants were convicted. 1 had died mid-trial. 11 received death sentences. Bösel was one of them. She was hanged at Hamelin prison in early May 1947 by Albert Pierrepoint. Sources disagree on whether the date was May 2 or May 3, and on the precise order in which the 3 Ravensbrück women went to the gallows. Those executed at Hamelin were first buried in the prison grounds, then reinterred in 1954 at the Amwil Cemetery. In 1986, after the graves became a destination for neo-Nazi visitors, the markers were removed. Leaving open ground, her case endures because it resists the comfortable version of this history. Bösel was not a fanatic ideologue at the top of a chain of command. She was mid-level, briefly posted, holding a job that in any other institution would have been paperwork. The court decided that filling out that paperwork, in that building, in that winter, was participation in murder. That is a demanding standard, and it raises questions still argued over today. What an ordinary administrative role becomes inside a machinery of killing, and whether the answer is different for the people who signed the lists than for the people who opened the doors. The trial also shows the limits of the justice available in 1947. A court that could only reach a portion of the crimes it heard about. Ravensbrück killed tens of thousands. 11 death sentences were the answer the law could give.